This presentation is meant to be more thought-provoking than anything else. It's designed to make you ask questions. So the only thing that we really and truly ask everyone to do is to quite simply go away from here. Every single one of these particular topics that are brought up, I'll be honest, you will have a lot of questions on the end of it, put it that way. Just go home, research into it, and of course, come back and pop off as many questions as you really want, to be honest with you. So Bitcoin, reshaping power and money. Now, what you see here is the global pyramid of power. This is what currently is structured into everything. At the top of that global pyramid of power, you have the powerful families. These are people that, just by their birthrights, they have divine power to rule. So people like your Rothschilds, people like your Morgans, they have a few mechanisms that they have in place, one of them being world financial control. They control the World Bank, Bank of International Settlement, the central bank being a major one. The central bank is a for-profit company, meaning an individual, organization, or group own the central bank. They own the right of creation of capital. They also control interest rates, tax hikes. Then it goes on to world resource control. They control the water that we drink, the food that we eat. Then from world population control, the information that we actually digest as people. So the religions that we follow, government, education, and media. 6 corporations owned 90% of Western media. The internet completely destroyed this. The reason why the internet completely destroyed this is because we can actually communicate and digest information on a peer-to-peer basis. Now, from questioning my parents or my parents' parents, the way that they will actually receive information is through newspapers. They would have to read the articles that were written. They couldn't contact each other on a peer-to-peer basis. So if something was happening in Australia, for example, I would have to trust what was written. I can't contact someone that is actually on the ground at that particular point. So if I was one of those corporations and I wanted to push a certain narrative, it would be very easy for me to do so. Then, of course, right at the bottom of that, you have the debt slaves. This is the majority. This is individuals like myself, and this is individuals like you guys. The current societal structure that we all follow. True wealth equals time and freedom. What we mean by this is, even though I love what I do, we are taking very positive steps to actually building a new society, but I am a perfect example of what you'd call a modern day slave. I have to come to work every single day so that I can quite simply go home and put a roof over my head and food on my table. Unfortunately, not everyone is in the position where they actually love what they do. A lot of people do hate their jobs. So what money is, and the way that you effectively beat this game, is you accumulate so much wealth to the point where you can actually buy your freedom back. But it's a game that very few can actually manage to obtain that amount of wealth. That is why the retirement age that we have in place right now is 65 years old. And of course, once you hit 65 years old, a lot of the time you just want to live out the rest of your life. You don't really want to question the mechanisms that were actually put in place. So with money, no matter what your standing is, whether you are ultra wealthy or whether you are literally living month by month, money is something that you should always educate yourself on. Because what money truly is the economic energy that we put into our job that is actually stored. So why would we be duped out of what is quite simply our time on this planet? Now, a lot of people believe that money and currency is the exact same thing. That is very far from the truth. What a currency quite typically is, it has to comply to 6 rule sets. Those 6 rule sets: medium of exchange, a unit of account, quite simply meaning it has numbers on it, portable, durable, divisible, fungible. Fungible meaning each unit is the same. Now, currency has no real intrinsic value. What I mean by that is the £10 that I have in my pocket at the moment, the only real intrinsic value that it has is the money that is, or the paper that is actually used to create it, and the ink that is actually printed on that money. There is nothing supporting the true value. It is quite simply just a belief system. It's a promissory note, meaning that once I actually pass you my £10 note, you just quite simply believe it will buy you the exact same amount of goods and services as what I believed. What a true money is, a perfect example of what a true money is something that has been tested over time, which is gold. Money is a true store of value. It is limited in supply, meaning that you can't just artificially print more of it, which they do with currency. Money is true financial sovereignty. At this particular point, money and currency used to share a relationship. That is no longer the case anymore. Now, let's look into the actual history of this. How did this all actually happen? After World War II, the US dollar was established as the world reserve currency. The reason why they were actually established as the world reserve currency is because they were the global superpower at that particular point. Now, consequently, nation states began trading commodities in US dollars, meaning that they had to price gold and silver in USD. It's important to highlight at this particular point, the dollar was actually still backed by gold. So there was something actually underpinning the dollar that was giving it true value. Now, where this agreement actually came into place, and there's an analogy that Michael actually uses, which is the shepherd and sheep analogy. Just picture the US being the shepherd and the rest of the neighboring countries being the sheep, the herd. Now, for the sheep, they see a shepherd opening up the white pearly gates. They see that as salvation. They see that as basically the gates being opened and it is a safe zone for them to go in. But what they don't understand is that it was the actual shepherd in the first place that set the dog on them to cause terror and chaos. Now, the 1st of July, 1944, 44 countries sent representatives to Bretton Woods. The US at this particular point, because of the shepherd and sheep analogy, currently held 2/3 of all the gold reserves after World War II. All the currencies actually got linked to the US dollar at this particular point because they were the biggest bully in the room. So what effectively happened is you had all of the other currencies, you had the dollar, and then it was the dollar by itself that was actually linked and pegged to gold. Now, the US, Bretton Woods didn't actually work. The reason why it didn't work is because the US just quite simply kept on increasing its money supply, its currency supply, whilst the gold that was actually backing that currency was reducing. At that particular time, they also introduced two particular tools, and this is also going back to the global pyramid of power. They introduced the IMF, International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund's purpose was to encourage international trade and to lend available reserves to countries with trade deficits. Then the next mechanism that they actually introduced was the World Bank. The World Bank was to lend money to countries after World War II that were war ravaged. So quite simply, to put it in simple terms, all the US done is went in, created a scenario where it forced all of these individuals to fight against each other, caused chaos. Straight after that, they went and bought up portions of all of these countries' cents on the dollar. Now, when the gold standard was completely abolished, bear in mind that the US was still the world reserve currency at this point. August 15th, 1971, President Nixon killed the gold standard. The US government had to actually create a completely false narrative to give the dollar value again because it was no longer being backed by gold. So the false narrative that they gave was a use case. That use case was when they made arrangements with Saudi Arabia, and they done this between 1972 and 1974, they made sure that all oil transactions had to be made using the US dollar. They had to create a completely false incentive, and that is the thing that was propping up the value of the dollar. And the thing that they actually used to back that up and keep that in place was their military might. What happens if you don't actually use the world reserve currency and you try to go against the grain? Let's just take a few of the examples. Now, I'm not saying these people are positive or negative, but these are just a few of the examples. Gaddafi. Gaddafi began consolidating large amounts of gold to the tune of 144 tons of gold. And for a country that had a population of 6 million people, that is a very vast amount. Gaddafi proposed to African states to shift to a new gold dinar, meaning that the gold dinar was actually made from physical gold. They would no longer peg it to the US dollar. The US would have completely lost the stranglehold to African states. And Gaddafi was the gentleman that was actually leading this. And of course, I'm pretty sure every single person in here knows what happened to him. 2001. And this is when the dollar did start to pretty much unfold because people were trying to question it. In 2001, Iraq switched from the petrodollar and began selling their oil in euros. As soon as that happened, sanctions got placed on them. The Bush administration rallied support for a war, and he used details of weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein was either going to use on his people or Israel. So he used a narrative to entice other countries to join into a war to make sure that they still secured the dollar. Again, we know what happened to him. Bear in mind, I'm not saying these people are positive or negative. This is just a general view. Now, more recent events. So America is no longer the biggest bully in the playground, and they cannot exert their weight everywhere. November 2017, China and Russia bypassed the dollar in the bilateral agreement where they hold each other's currency and do direct settlement without transferring USD for oil and gold. As soon as that happened, again, sanctions got placed on them. Russia dumped the majority of their US stocks. Now you have China coming into play, more recent event in 2018. China set up a petro-yuan exchange that allows people to buy oil futures in yuan and gold. So it's very evident that they are no longer the biggest bully in the playground, and this is now starting to come into play. And because a lot of people are questioning this structure, because of the access of information, the fact that we have access to the internet and we can share this information very freely, the US now have to implement something. And again, in terms of presidents, things do change. Power structures behind these presidents do also change. Just because America was that way back in the day doesn't mean that they're the same America now. The gold standard being reborn. How do you fix that system? Since President Donald J. Trump was elected in 2017, there's been a number of claims of a new gold standard, and that gold standard would make America great again. Although these claims are not false, a gold-backed currency would do away with the current debt-based system that we have in place right now. The question is, first of all, would anyone trust the system that we got duped into the first time, and then they quite simply pulled a rabbit out of the hat and completely switched everything? Are people truly going to believe that system? Manipulated trust in government. This is going to directly show how particular events that happen in society do actually impact people's pockets aggressively. Here we have a survey that was actually done in Washington. Now, this survey was quite simply the trust that the people had in their government at that particular time. I only chose a few of these events because this could have gone on for near enough forever. But of course, at the top are a long list of all the previous presidents. JFK, he was a people's president. He was publicly assassinated at that particular point. And of course, we had the Vietnam War come into play as well. And of course, Kennedy is right there. Then you see President Nixon. Nixon is directly there. President Nixon removed the backing of gold from the dollar itself. Public trust started to decline massively at this particular point. Let's take a more recent event, and this is actually being brought up again, and now people are starting to look deeper and deeper into this event because there are a lot of questions that do need to be answered around it. We shouldn't have just been happy with the narrative that was pushed at this particular time. being 9/11. George Bush, of course, 9/11 happened. That invoked a lot of patriotism. So of course, when patriotism happens, an event like 9/11 happens as well, everyone wants to gather together and fight all external forces. This caused false patriotism. Now, everyone just basically realized that George Bush was an idiot at the same time. Then public trust declined massively once again. Now, if we take this very same graph and label it to the actual spending power of the dollar, they look exactly the same near enough. So this directly shows that they financially gain from these situations that do happen. With the systems that have been put in place, and of course, America wanting to go back to a gold standard, Bitcoin is something that does provide financial sovereignty, but it doesn't do the whole job. We still have to do a lot of work and implement a lot of mechanisms to get there. What the issue is with the current financial system, and we need to highlight this so that everyone is aware and you actually do truly understand what the real power of Bitcoin is a public ledger. What I mean by that is with the traditional financial system that we have in place right now, everyone is privatized. So meaning if I'm a customer of Barclays and we're all customers of Barclays, I can see my ledger, so I can see my history of transactions, but I won't be able to see yours, I won't be able to see yours, I won't be able to see yours. That goes to a higher degree. Barclays will be able to see all of ours. Then you have the clearinghouses. The clearinghouses will be able to see all the list of transactions that have happened with each and every single one of those banks. Then above that, you have the central banks. Issue is, we can't look up and then hold those individuals accountable because we don't know what's happening up there. But the people at the top can see all the list of transactions that are happening downwards, meaning that manipulation happens and we are all very much aware that it does happen at a massive scale. So what Bitcoin does, with it being a completely public ledger, no matter what your social standing is, no matter what your net worth is, all of these transactions are recorded. So if a transaction is being done for a positive or a negative reason, we could hold those individuals accountable because we can all see exactly what's going on. Gold at the moment is one of the only global monies that we have in place. But is it movable? Not really. If I want to do small transactions, it's not really the most cumbersome metal to be dealing with. If I want to do a transactions overseas, again, I'm going to have to post it off. And we've seen loads of situations happen in the past where there are issues with gold. Now, Bitcoin is the first time that we've actually ever had a second option other than the fiat system where I can transfer money freely at will. Now, just because an individual is born in a jurisdiction where they are not hindered by innovation, that does not mean they cannot contribute to global commerce. A system that allows decentralized access, because that is exactly what Bitcoin does, enables anyone, no matter what their social standings actually are. Thank you. So one last thing. Sorry to cut you off. But one last thing is what we're building here at Bitstocks, because of course Bitcoin does half the job. It gets us to a point where we do have financial sovereignty, but we need to build in the mechanisms to make it palatable for everyone. And that is exactly what our goal here is at Bitstocks, to make Bitcoin not geeky, so that everyone can use it and they believe and they know no different from the traditional banking system that we have in place right now. We're getting to the stages where, of course, we are still a fair bit away, but we are definitely getting closer and closer to that stage. What we are also building in, and this is our platform, will actually allow banking-like experiences, so you won't really and truly know the difference. You'll be able to do all the same things that you can do at the moment. But what we are also building, because I think it's very evident that we don't like fiat currency, and it will make no sense because Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are extremely volatile at the moment. So with anyone actually holding their net worth or a certain degree of wealth in Bitcoin right now, until it gets to the point where it's mainstream and merchant adoption is to such a degree, that's when it will start to stabilize. But right now it's extremely volatile. So if you're using these banking-like experiences, how do you have stability? You don't want to go back to a fiat currency and hold a fiat currency. So what we're going to be enabling here at Bitstocks is the option and the ability to actually hold your money in what true money is gold. Until, of course, the market does stabilize, then we won't need that anymore. But yeah, that's it. So thank you, guys.